find it. Anyway, that's the shot we were used to seeing it. So the pin has left here, where it was, and is now underneath the plate over here. So in fact, the warning wheel turned just over 2.5 turns from the point where the arbor fell off of one of these lifters and got picked up by the next lifter. Now in fact, that is pretty ideal. And I'll explain why to you in a moment. This is where we start getting a little bit involved now. I'm just locking the train still with my tweezers, or better still with a screwdriver. And now we'll begin to explain. Okay. We'll begin to explain to you the significance of that. Before we go on assembling our clock, there are one or two principles that need explaining. And the first one is in connection with excuse me. The first one is in connection with why have we got this 2.5 turns with a warning wheel anyway, between the arbor falling off of one lifter and being picked up by the next. And the reason for it is due to something called inertia. Now, inertia could be defined as a body's resistance to change. But what it means practically is that a stationary object takes more energy to start and keep it moving than it would be just to keep it moving. And in the same way, a moving object would require more energy to bring it to a position of rest than it would do to keep it in a position of rest. Now, with our striking train, we have, well, if we call the flyer wheel for the moment, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sorry, I'm kind of wrong, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, if we include the barrel as well, we've got something like 6 wheels that have all got to start from stationary every time the train is triggered. And that's going to require a lot of energy. But we also have this heavy hammer that's going to get lifted. And what we don't want is for the clock to start striking in a particular hour and the mainspring have to drive not only every wheel in the clock, but it has to drive the hammer as well. So to help minimize the effects of inertia, what we do is we make sure that when the last hammer falls on any particular sequence, that the hammer arbor falls against a stop and not onto the next lifter. That way, during the next half hour or hour, whichever is going to strike next, that the train has a chance to build up speed first. Then the train can cope with lifting the hammer. So if that's what we want, the next question we might ask ourselves in that case is, well, how much run do we need? And for reasons that you'll see better a little bit later on, what we're already looking at on this particular clock, 2.5 turns of the warning wheel between falling off of one lifter and being picked up by the next would be a good compromise. So on this particular clock, which will be not too different from an awful lot of other clocks, that's what I should go for. Now, in actual fact, we wouldn't like the number of turns of the warning wheel to be significantly less than 2.5 turns, because to make it significantly less, we run the risk of the hammer being lifted a little bit prematurely and giving too much load to the mainspring. that might not affect the early part of the, from winding the clock, but it would affect the striking train towards the end of the week, assuming that you wind your clock on at the beginning of the week. But what I'm saying is that when the clock becomes closer to being run down, the effort of lifting the hammer and starting the wheels turning from station could be too great. So I would suggest to you that 2.5 turns of the warning wheel from falling off of one lifter to being picked up by the next is ideal and minimum. But in fact, you can have substantially more. But the more free run you get, it has the effect of lifting the hammer less high. And if you lift the hammer less high, you don't get quite as loud a sound from the gong. And to get a better sound, then you have to stiffen up the spring, which is not in the interest of inertia in any case. So I would say to you that whilst 2.5 turns of the warning wheel is ideal and minimum, that you could accommodate 3 or even up to perhaps 4 turns of the warning wheel from the arbor falling off of one lifter being picked up by the next. But I certainly wouldn't have more. If I had more or less, then the cure would be, bearing in mind all of these things are relative, but the cure would be either to bend the stop here in relation to the bit that gets lifted there, or alternatively bend the little bit that's on the plate itself, which I'll attempt to get in your picture. If I get the arbor out of the way, can't see it clearly in the picture. See if a little bit of light. No, a little bit of light doesn't help much either. All right. Did we? There. Okay, that piece there. The little piece that this falls onto then, that could be bent. So we've got 3 things that we could alter there to affect it. And I'll let you work out how you do it, because it's, to anybody with aptitude for horology, you should be able to work that out yourselves, quite simply. So that's one consideration. And in this clock, we've already sussed it out, and we've got a little over 2.5, which is well inside our minimum ideal 2.5, our maximum of 4. Now there's something else. What I'm attempting to do here really is to explore 1 or 2 principles before we finally set the clock up, to get the principles out of the way first. Then I can make a vague reference to them when we're setting the clock up, and you'll understand why we're doing it, so that we don't lose the thread of what we're doing. So the next idea I want to put across to you is the purpose behind the warning. Although there are some clocks, particularly repeater clocks, that actually operate without any warning, for a clock like this, the warning is desirable to prevent the premature and uncertain unlocking of the striking train, the inadvertent relocking of it each time the clock strikes. One could imagine just a detent and a pin to unlock. Well, due to the side play of the pivot in the hole, it would be possible for the train to unlock and inadvertently relock due to a pivot moving across the hole. So to remove those possibilities, what we have in practice is this. We have, I think I'll give another pen which is a little bit thinner and it will show better on the screen now. trying to work out where I'm going to draw this. I'm going to take the chicken there and I'm going to draw this in the middle of the screen. Let us say that that is our warning wheel. And we have a pin in the warning wheel there. And we're going to put a detent here to arrest the pin. So at the moment this wheel is trying to turn in that direction but can't, because this pin is resting against that detent. Now we have another lever down here. This is the locking detent, and this one down here is going to be the warning detent. And what we're going to have is the cannon pinion lifting the lifting piece, which eventually is going to lift this locking detent to unlock that pin. But at the same time, this lever down here, which in no way can interfere with that pin, will also be lifted to a position there. Now, by the time this lever lifts to a position there, in other words, before this is unlocked, this lever is already in the path of that pin. So this lever, the locking lever that is, the locking detent, unlocks. This pin now advances to a position there and is arrested by the warning detent. So that involved a half a turn of the warning wheel. Now this lever continues to lift, so it can't come back and interfere with that pin. But this lever drops back to this position again. Now the train is free to operate. So that actual action is referred to as the warning. And where it's under your control, in any striking clock, the warning is always a half a wheel. Half a wheel warning. Now it would be true to say that during the warning the hammer must not be on the rise. That is, the hammer arbor mustn't be in contact with the hammer lifting wheel. Otherwise we'd be back with our problem of inertia. Nor when this warning detent drops, also the hammer still mustn't be on the rise, or still mustn't start to lift until this wheel, and in fact the whole of the train, has had a chance to pick up speed. That's an important idea for you to latch onto. There will be other clocks that you will do where the warning is out of your control, and it may be that the warning is less than half a wheel. For example, if the locking detent is positioned there and the warning detent is positioned there, then it's out of your control. And then the warning will be whatever the designer of the clock intended. But when they are, as they are here, or there will be circumstances similar to this, but when the locking detent isn't present. But in actual fact, in this particular clock, there will be the locking is actually arranged in a different way. But the pin will still come to rest there, and there will still be half a wheel warning. So where it's under your control, it's invariably half a wheel warning. So if you've latched onto that idea, then I think we can make progress again on our clock. So um, the, the need for all of that is now going to be borne in mind when we're reassembling the rest of the clock. So what I've got the thoughts of doing now is to putting on the gathering pallet and putting on the various detents so that they're in the right place. So all leading towards that then, I would first of all replace the lifting piece. Now we were talking of the warning detent just now, and the way I drew it, the warning detent was here, and in actual fact it might be better for you to look at it the way it is on the clock. There we are. Right. On the clock, the warning detent is in the 6 o'clock position, and the locking detent is at 12 o'clock position. And there's your half a wheel warning from there to there. So on the clock itself then, here is the warning detent. The locking detent is here, and it's that piece there. So having put on already the lifting piece, we're now going to put on the rack hook which carries the locking detent. And then make sure that this little spring here rests against here to just assist gravity in lowering the rack hook. So in this instance that spring will require a little bit of bending up. That's it. Good. The spring is now assisting gravity. So now we need to insert a pin here and a pin over here to lock those two levers in position. When these clocks were made, they had wraparound pins, but they're such a nuisance to put in each time that they've been changed for taper pins. If you make such a change, do make sure that you still have end shake in the arbor after fitting the pins. One tightened and the second one tightened. And after replacing pins like that, feel the end shakes of the two arbors to make sure the end shake is still there, and it is. Now, this is the next important bit now. The most difficult part about strikes, not that anything is very difficult, but the bit that people so often get wrong is where to replace the gathering pallet. We know it goes on the gathering pallet pivot there, but the angle is important, and this is how you set it up. You first of all lift the rack hook so that the train is free to operate. At the moment my index finger of the left hand is controlling the fly. So I allow the train to operate, and I'm observing the arbor being lifted by the hammer lifting wheel. And I'm going to stop the train at the instant when the arbor falls off of a lifter. Which it has just done. Now I'm going to hold the train up while I explain something to you. Here, once again, we have our warning wheel, which is rotating in that direction. And we know that the the locking descent, when it falls, is going to fall from that sort of height, and it's going to fall down to that position there. Now, we don't want the train to lock instantaneously. This is an important idea to latch onto. We don't want the train to lock instantaneously when the hammer arbor falls off of a lifter. The reason for that is that on another lifter, the arbor might not have quite fallen off of the lifter due to a little bit of inaccuracy in gear cutting, due to a little bit of wear in pivot holes. So to be safe on all lifters, we always want the train to run on a little bit after the last hammer has fallen. So the next thing we've got to decide is, okay, but by how much? Well, it's got to be enough to allow for those little inaccuracies that you can't easily see by eye. And the bottom line for that one is that when the last hammer falls, the train should run on by about a quarter of a turn. Let's say a quarter of a turn minimum. So that is measured on this wheel. So when the last hammer falls, this warning wheel should run on by a minimum and probably an ideal of a quarter of a turn. Now there are some clocks where you have to move one wheel in relation to another so that when the last hammer falls, the pin in the warning wheel should be there, allowing the train to run on by a quarter of a turn of the warning wheel and then lock. Now on long case clocks you actually have to do that. You've got to move one wheel in relation to another to cause that to happen. But on a mass-produced clock like this one, the clock is very forgiving. It's very accommodating. And do you remember earlier, from falling off of one to being picked up by the next, we said that we had 2.5 turns of the warning wheel before the next lifter lifted the arbor? That's what we got to play with. We've got 2.5 turns to play with. So, this is the rule now. This again is important because this is the rule. When the last hammer falls on a mass-produced clock like this one, when the last hammer falls, the warning wheel should always run on by a minimum of a quarter of a turn. But in actual fact, it can run on by an amount in excess of that, dependent upon where the pin happens to be when the arbor does fall. So for example, supposing the pin was here when the arbor fell off of the lifter, the minimum is a quarter of a turn run on, so the pin can run on and lock. But supposing the pin was back here, it can run on by a quarter of a turn plus that bit extra and lock. If the pin were over here, it can run on by a quarter of a turn plus whatever extra it needs to come to the lock position. Supposing the pin was actually at the lock position, it would have to run on by a quarter of a turn plus another 3/4 of a turn to come to a lock position. So if we're going to be purist about this, what it would amount to is this. When the last hammer falls, the train would run on by a minimum of a quarter of a turn, then lock. But if, when the last timer falls, the pin is just past there, then the train would have to run on by almost 1 1/4 turns. But as we've got 2.5 turns to play with, that's okay. So at the very worst, we've got almost 1 1/4 turns of the warning wheel when the last timer falls, plus half a wheel warning, so that's 1 1/4 plus half is 1 3/4. That leaves us with 3/4 of a turn after the warning of the next hour or half hour for the train to pick up speed before the hammer is lifted again. And that's considered as safe. In other words, what I've just said is that of the 2.5 turns we've got to play with, if the pin is here when the last timer falls, the train runs on by a quarter, which will bring it just past the lock position. We'll go round again to the lock position. That's used very nearly 1 1/4. And for the next hour or half hour, you're going to get half a wheel warning. So that's 1 1/4 plus a half is 1 3/4. Now after the warning, when the train is released, provided you have 2.5 turns to play with, you've now got 1 3/4, or you've got 2.5 less 1 3/4 for the warning wheel to pick up speed before the next lifter starts to lift the arbor. So, all we do now, now that we're ready for the practical side of it, all we do is get the gathering part ready. Now, control, as we've already done, but I'll go through that again in actual fact. All we need to do now is control the fly. I'm going on to the next lifter for this now. Hold the lifter up, the rack hook up out of the way. Now control the fly until the arbor falls off of the next lifter. Which has just happened. Now the pin in the warning wheel at the moment could be anywhere, depending upon which tooth ended up in which pinion leaf when I assemble the clock. Now it so happens, purely by chance, the pin in the warning wheel just now is exactly a quarter of a turn from the detent. In other words, the pin in the warning wheel just now is here. Now our rule was that it must run on by a minimum of a quarter of a turn. Well, a minimum of a quarter of a turn is bringing it up, ideally. So what I do now on the clock is to allow the pin to advance from there, allow the pin to advance from there to the lock position there, which it is now locked. Now as it's going to be the gathering part that allows it to lock, I now have to put the gathering part on in a favourable position to allow locking to occur. Now, to show you on paper, first of all, where that ideal position would be, if I can find a clear bit of paper to write on, our gathering part looks a bit like this. And a pin there. Now, the lever on the rack hook, we've got this little piece here. And it's that little piece there that falls into this gap to allow the locking to occur. So we allow it to fall into that position there. Now you'll notice that it's touching neither side of the gathering part. But I've drawn it so that the gap is a little smaller this side than it is that side. This will allow, in view of the fact that the gathering pallet actually turns in that direction, it will give the gathering pallet, it will give the rack hook a chance to fall first, allowing this detent to fall into the path of that pin before the pin gets there. So in practice then, on the clock now, there is our pin against the detent, and so we put the gathering pallet on so that it would cause the locking to occur, like that. Now it couldn't have occurred prematurely because you notice that you've got a cam around the gathering pallet. So for example, if I trigger the train right now, this will make several turns to the gathering pallet's one turn, and this cannot lock prematurely because this piece is riding high on the cam. Now this piece is riding high on the cam of the gathering pallet. So it's not until the gap comes around that it can allow the rack hook to drop for the detent to fall into the path of the pin. That's it set up. The only thing that it would be necessary to do, if you remember, we did say that this quarter of a turn run on was to allow for the inaccuracies in gear cutting and wear in pivot holes, things like that. So it would be prudent, having set it up for one lifter, to go in and check that it's safe on all lifters. This word safe is used a lot in horology. And remember, the quarter of a turn that we're talking about is only nominal. It's a bit like crossing the road. How long can you leave it before it's no longer safe? And it's not something which is exactly finite. We have to talk of safety margins. And so with the clock, our safety margin is a quarter of a turn. So in other words, if on one of these lifters you get a minuscule amount more, or rather less than 1/4 of a turn to lock in, you get away with it. But you don't want to leave it to the bare minimum, because we start then getting into the realms of what is unsafe. And it is never right to leave a clock unsafe. Well, that's the most difficult part, if any of it is difficult, I would question that. But that's the most involved part of strikes, really dealt with now. And the only, well, certainly got some more bits to put on, but the only thing of real significance is where to put the hour wheel. So we'll go on building our clock up, and then we'll think about putting the hour wheel on. So for the moment then, we can drop our clock back down on the bench again and replace the ratchet wheel for the time side. A little bit of oil underneath the ratchet wheel. Replace the ratchet wheel. Make sure that the click goes right down to the bottom of the root of the tooth there and operates properly. Replace the ratchet wheel bridge and replace the screw for the bridge. Centralize the hole in the bridge around the winding square and then tighten the screw down. Before I go on, there is one little thing that I have omitted with respect to the gathering part that I'd better do now. Because this is a demonstration, I've merely pushed the gathering part on. And on customers' clocks, pushing it on is not enough. What we need to do on a customer's clock is drive the gathering part on. Now, to drive it on, we have two hollow punches. the first hollow punch goes over the gathering pallet pin and the gathering pallet pivot to drive on. The second hollow punch, there's the first one, there's the second one. The second one is a little bit smaller. There's the first one. The second one is a little bit smaller, and the purpose of that one is to protect the pivot here. We don't want to mushroom the pivot by resting on a steel block at all. So the purpose of this punch, this hollow punch, is to support the plate but to protect the pivot, like so. So to drive this on, ideally one would have a steel block to rest on, or alternatively one could rest on the bench like so. It's a bit of a balancing trick, this. But one could rest on the bench like so, hold the second punch over the gathering pallet pin and over the pivot, and then with a hammer drive the gathering pallet on. Now I'm not going to drive this one on because, being a demonstration clock, the hole in the gathering pallet tends to stretch, and it makes demonstration a little more difficult. So for all practice clocks, I'm quite happy to have the gathering pallet just pushed on, but knowing that with a customer's clock one has to drive the gathering pallet on so that it is secure and cannot move, even when they do on some clocks, even when the train locks on the gathering pallet. It doesn't lock on the gathering pallet on this clock, but it does on others. Right, to continue, having spotted my own accidental mistake, we now go on reassembling the clock, and just now I would replace the minute wheel, replace the hour wheel. Now the hour wheel has to be correctly associated with the can and pinion in a moment, so for the moment I just dropped it on while I replace the rack. You see, without the rack and without the hour wheel, right now if we only had one short lifter, the clock would strike once at 1/2 and once at the hour. But by incorporating a rack and a count wheel, and a snail, we can cause more than one blow to be struck. So without this, every time you unlock that, only one blow will be struck. But with this, if two teeth fall like that, two blows can be struck. That isn't falling at the moment, only because the gathering pallet hasn't been secured. There we are. Sorry, it wasn't for that reason. It was the way I was holding it. I was preventing something from falling correctly. Anyway, as it is at the moment, it'll work okay. And what I need to do now is turn the hands and set up the hour wheel. Now, in the absence of a hand, then you can move the centre arbor we're going to simulate the hand with a pin chuck. And what I'm trying to do now is to associate the lifters correctly with the snail. And so I'm holding the escape wheel stationary, which is important, and turning the cannon pinion to unlock the train and cause the rack to fall. Now the rack has just fallen, but it happened rather quickly, so I'll go through that a second time so that you're quite clear about what's happening. In view of the fact that the rack fell, that means that we're operating on the high lifter. So the next one must be the low lifter, which is of no particular interest to me. So let's get that one out of the way first. Sorry, what I've just done is turn the hands backwards. Having turned the hand, let's come back again. Sorry about that, I turned the hands backwards inadvertently. So the next thing that's going to happen now is the low lifter operates. So we're just going to have a half hour now. But notice that the rack doesn't fall. Therefore the clock can only strike once. Now we're coming to a high lifter. And I'm going to turn the hour wheel around to a more favourable position. What I want is for the rack to fall initiated by the high lifter. So I'm holding the escape wheel still, turning the cannon pinion around. The lifting piece is lifting. That's the bit under my thumb. Lifting. The rack hook is lifting. The warning has occurred. The rack has now fallen, and that's the bit that I wanted. So now I turn the hour wheel to make sure that the tail of the rack falls exactly in the middle of a step. So I get the angle right so that you can see it. You can have better out there. There we are. Right. Now you notice that the rack is falling more in the corner of the snail and not in the middle of the step. So what you do, you disengage the hour wheel from the minute wheel, turn the hour wheel around, now it's got it too near the other end, so bring it back a little bit, and that's much nearer the centre of the step. Now, in the event that you can't get it exactly in the centre of the step, instead of disengaging the hour wheel there from the minute pinion, which is there, darn it, let's move that back again. There we are. Right. If you find that by moving this one tooth in relation to the minute wheel pinion, that you can't get the tail of the rack exactly onto the middle of the flat, by disengaging the minute wheel from the cannon pinion, leaving the hour wheel and the minute pinion in engagement, it's possible to effectively turn the snail and the hour wheel by a part of a turn, by a part of a tooth, so that we can get the tail of the rack falling exactly in the centre of the step. So that we have now done, and so what I'm going to do is test now on a number of flats, on a number of different hours. Now for that, you're going to need to hold camera to focus, right. Now for this, what I'm going to do is hold the escape wheel still while I lift the rack hook and hold it up. Now I can operate the snail through the half past and the hour and observe where the tail of the rack is on the next step. And the next again. Half hour, hour. That's still okay. Half hour, hour. That's still okay. Now, of course, the steps are getting shorter. And particularly important are the steps 11, 12 and 1. At the moment we are on 10, 11, no 10. So 10:30, 11, that's safe. 11:30, 12. Now you won't be on the centre of the 12 o'clock step because the tail rises on an arc. You get an artificial or a full step there. Now lift the rack all the way up, release the rack hook. We can do the half past, now we can do the 1 o'clock. And again, don't expect the rack to fall in the centre of the 1 o'clock step. It's now fallen, so ignore that. Now check on the 2 o'clock. That's 1:30, 2 o'clock. And it's not dead centre, but quite safe. So we've been almost all the way around, so that's 2:30, 3 o'clock is safe. 3:30, 4 o'clock is safe. 4:30, 5 o'clock is safe. So we can, I think we can say now that the tail of the rack is safe everywhere. Now we don't want to lose the association between the hour wheel and the cannon pinion. So to make sure that we don't lose it, I'm still holding the train up at the moment, by the way, but to make sure that we don't lose it, what we do is we fit a large washer over the minute wheel like that and fit the clip that holds that in position so that when I get there, let's clip that up tight first. Not easy to do with the left hand when you're right-handed. Now once that clip has been replaced, that should prevent the hour wheel from lifting forward and losing the particular tooth that's in the particular pinion leaf. In other words, losing the association there. But at the same time, the hour wheel still has up and down movement, it still has end shape. Not the hour wheel, sorry, the minute wheel. But the minute wheel still has end shape. So that's okay now. Next, replace the little circlip that locks the rack in position. It's inside the clock, so I have to turn the clock. There we are. Right, we'll go back to that. Oh, there we are. We'll pop the rack back on again. In fact, while the rack is off, I might as well take advantage of that and point out to you that this rack has a tail that we'll be talking about. Notice that there's an angle on the pin. notice that the pin can be pushed back and in fact is spring loaded. That's so that you can turn the hands on the clock backwards, and the pin will ride over the face of the snail rather than damage the snail or the pin. So that's the rack replaced. Now the circuit holds the rack. And that will require a little bit of persuasion. There we are. Whenever you put anything like that on, always test the end shake of it. Make sure it's free, and it is. So that's it set up. So I can now release the rack, the lifting piece rather, and release the train, and let the gathering pallet pin gather up the teeth in the rack. And the train is now locked. So that is all of the striking mechanism now set up correctly, and all we have to do now is consider the escapement. What we're going to do now is replace the parts and depths. So start off by putting the pallets back into the clock. Now replace the pallet cock. Replace the cock screws and the washer. The idea of the washer underneath the head of the screws is so that as you tighten the screws down, the cock stays still and doesn't move with the tightening of the screw. Now what I've done for the moment is to lower the pallet cock so that at the moment the escape wheel teeth wouldn't pass the pallets. Now put a little power on the ratchet wheel with a key. And now look at a little bit of pegwood. Right. At the moment the escape wheel won't pass the pallets. So what I'm going to do is use a little bit of blunted pegwood to just cut it off a bit like a chisel so that the cock can be lifted without marking the plates. Too many people use screwdrivers for this purpose, and it does mark the plates. So just ease the cock up a little bit, adjusting the tension of the screws if necessary. Just have them lightly lightly down onto the cock. So you can still move the cock, but the cock won't move without a little bit of force. Oops, that's too much. Now, keep raising the cock until the escape wheel will just pass as you lead the crutch from side to side. And raise the pallet cock, keeping it parallel all the time. Now the escape wheel is now beginning to pass. And at the moment the escapement is a little bit on the deep side of right, so I'm going to raise the cock a little bit more. And what I'm looking for is 1 degree of drop. And I seem to have that at the moment, so I'm going to tighten the screws down a little bit. And then double check. Now this is something which is going to be virtually impossible to get onto the screen, I feel. But we'll try to get the angle. Right, now the checking is done by looking through these holes here and until you can catch sight of the pallet. Now we've got a focusing problem here as well. What I'll do a minute is switch off the automatic focus and see if we can get this right on the manual focus. There we are. I don't know if this is going to work or no, but yeah, from this angle it's difficult to see that. But I'm looking at the pallets in the escape wheel, as you can see there, but with an eyeglass it's possible to observe the impulse and then the drop. I can see a tooth dropping onto that face, but it's very difficult just to drop from that. So we'll have a go with the other pallet and see if that helps at all. Just a question of getting the angle right. Right, let's see if there's any chance of getting it this way then. Let's try this. Certainly we can see the pallet there. What I'm looking for is the gap between the tip of the tooth there as it passes the pallet and the discharging corner of the pallet. And what I'm looking for there is the leading edge of the tooth to be 1 degree in advance of the discharging corner of the pallet. Easily seen with an eyeglass, but not so easily seen here. Now that might be better. This spring here keeps getting in the way. It's very difficult to see on the camera, but anyway, we're looking for a 1 degree of